You're watching UATV News. My name is Inna Kosinska. Good evening. The threat to the energy security of Ukraine, or according to US President Joe Biden, a bad deal for Europe. What are the possible risks from the construction of Nord Stream 2, and what methods will the Kremlin use to force the world to give the go-ahead to launch the scandalous gas pipeline? Our correspondents found out.
Russia has turned gas supplies into an instrument to manipulate the countries of Europe. Ukraine's Minister of Energy said that European gas storage facilities are being depleted and prices for blue fuel are rising. The Kremlin is using this to force Europe to grant permission to launch Nord Stream 2.
Everything is based on the Gazprom's monopoly in the supply of gas by pipelines. Only this allows Russia to dictate the conditions for gas supplies to Europe. Even the launch of Nord Stream 2, given it is not subject to regulation of the third energy package, will not be able to fully meet the demand in the European Union without the Ukrainian route. Nord Stream 2 threatens not only energy security of Ukraine, but also that of the entire Europe and the Baltic states. This was announced by the US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Moreover, he recalled that the White House had already imposed sanctions against Russia, and they will be ready for new restrictions if Russia continues to put pressure on Ukraine or other European countries.
Russia should not be allowed to weaponize energy as a weapon against Ukraine, against countries like Poland and the Baltics, and undermine not just Ukraine's security, but Europe's energy security. So that is a shared challenge.
Earlier, the United States demanded explanations from the German government on what will be done so that Russia does not use gas as a weapon against Ukraine and the countries of Eastern Europe. Joe Biden still considers the pipeline a bad deal for Europe. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Vlada Tsurkan, UATV News.
If Russia violates its obligations to transit gas through Ukraine, the European Union will impose sanctions. This was stated by German Chancellor Angela Merkel at a joint briefing with US President Joe Biden in Washington. According to her, Nord Stream 2 is an additional project and should not replace gas transit through Ukraine. In turn, Joe Biden reaffirmed the United States' support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity and interests of Ukraine.
We agree on the importance of further integrating the Western Balkans into European institutions, and in our continued support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, as well as the continued importance of reforms in the support of their Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We stand together and will continue to stand together to defend our eastern flank allies at NATO against Russian aggression. And while I reiterated my concerns about Nord Stream 2, Chancellor Merkel and I are absolutely united in our conviction that Russia must not be allowed to use energy as a weapon to coerce or threaten its neighbors.
We have a number of instruments at our disposal which are not necessarily on the German side, but on the European side. For example, sanctions, and as regards Crimea, the breach of the Minsk Treaty has shown that we have those sanctions of these instruments at our disposal. We have the possibility to react. We are in contact with our European friends on this. The occupying administrations of the so-called republics in eastern Ukraine made the Ukrainians living on the other side of the contact line their hostages. This is their response to the desire of people, especially young people, to live, study and work in the territory controlled by Ukraine. According to Dmytro Lubinets, chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights, the occupation and reintegration of temporarily occupied territories, this is the reason for the blocking of the checkpoint by representatives of illegal armed groups. Besides, this also explains forced obtaining of Russian citizenship or fake passports of the so-called republics.
We understand that our citizens remain hostages of the situation. The occupation authorities understand that they have no prospects, and the youth who enter their so-called universities there too, because they receive some paper documents. That is, there is no state, there are no documents on graduation from higher educational institutions. There is automatically no prospect, there is no good job. Local youth wants to go to Ukraine, and we think that is the reason why the occupation authorities closed the checkpoints.
Imposing of state sanctions and pressure from the international community are the most effective instruments of influence on Russia in the issue of the occupation of Crimea. To improve coordination regarding sanctions policy at the international level, Ukraine is convening the Crimean Platform Summit on August 23rd. What specific steps are being considered, my colleagues found out.
60,000 Crimean Tatars. It is the number of representatives of the indigenous people of Crimea forced to flee from the persecution and repressions by the self-proclaimed authorities to the mainland of Ukraine. Former political prisoner Ismail Ramazanov knows firsthand about the methods of the invaders. Even your statements addressed to the occupying power are enough to provoke procedural actions against you, illegal procedural actions. I'm just one of the few people who did not keep silent about what was happening, that almost every week they are aware of searches, arrests, that they are aware of such facts as enforced disappearances. The liberation of Crimea and all political prisoners, this is exactly what the Crimean platform was created for. In the meantime, the most effective way to force the Russian Federation to return the occupied peninsula to Ukraine is sanctions.
Along with the Kremlin's policy of international isolation, it is sanctions that, from our point of view, influence the behavior of the aggressor state and force it not to cross certain red lines, especially when it comes to the everyday crimes which we observe in Crimea.
The main problem in the application of sanctions for the occupation of Crimea is the lack of a control mechanism. That is, it is almost impossible to check whether they are effective or not. Lack of a system and mechanisms for monitoring the effectiveness of sanctions, as well as responsibility for violating the sanctions regime. This is the first issue. The second is the absence of the main body responsible for the implementation of state sanctions policy. Third is the lack of a single register of special restrictive measures. According to experts, sanctions should be sectoral and at the same time they should hit the business, economy, trade and investments of the aggressor country. This should be a set of diplomatic, military, diplomatic, military, political and political measures to block Russia's opportunities to wage an aggressive war. Part of the deoccupation policy is the fight against propaganda and fakes. Earlier, the International Center for Countering Disinformation was launched in Ukraine, and the broadcasting of propaganda TV channels was also stopped. If we try to refute every information, it will only be a waste of resources. Therefore, the first thing is important, that is identifying the most important topics one needs to respond to. And one should not react to all topics. And second, it is necessary to explain people how misinformation works. The effect of sanctions against the Russian Federation is already tangible. For example, exports to the occupied peninsula have dropped by almost a third over the past 7 years. The banking and investment systems have practically ceased to exist. And most importantly, all civilized countries of the world consider Crimea to be an integral part of Ukraine. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Along with court hearing in The Hague, the investigation of downing of MH17 in summer of 2014 continues in Ukraine. This was announced by the Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova on the eve of the anniversary of the tragedy. She assured that Ukrainian law enforcement officers are doing everything possible so that the relatives of the victims feel justice and the world knows the truth. We thoroughly follow the process and, upon the request of the Dutch side, provide all the necessary assistance for the consideration of the case in court. However, this did not end the investigation in our criminal proceedings on the shooting down of MH17. Together with our partners in the International Joint Investigation Team, we are continuing our investigation, which is aimed at identifying other persons involved in this crime, including those who launched the rocket and issued the appropriate orders. Turkish unmanned attack complex Bayraktar is in service in the Ukrainian army. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Navy has also received mobile control terminals. Bayraktars will conduct reconnaissance operations and will be able to strike the enemy from air. The peculiarity of this complex is that control stations can be located not only on land, but also on any of the ships of the Ukrainian Navy. Denis Monastyrskyi became new Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. 271 MPs voted for his appointment. His predecessor, Sanevakov, held this position in the government for 7 years. This week, he resigned. The newly appointed minister was previously an MP and chaired the Law Enforcement Committee. Before the vote, he spoke about his priorities for the position.
I plan to focus on the fight against organized crime, the so-called crime bosses. I guarantee that the decisions of the National Security and Defense Council and the President on sanctions against the leaders of criminal groups will be implemented in full. The development and improvement of the patrol police will be one of my top priorities as well.
17 kilometers of new road surface, updated video monitoring system and modern LED lighting. For the first time since 2004, the highway connecting the capital with the main air gateway of the country, the international airport Boryspil, will be repaired. Reconstruction of the section of the road is carried out within the big construction program. The road is planned to be opened before August 24th, the Independence Day of Ukraine.
We have to do all the work in almost a month and a half, open traffic and no longer raise the issue of the Kyiv-Boryspil highway. This is highway not only for Kyiv and the region, but this is in fact our face. Because everyone who comes to Kyiv arrives to Boryspil airport. All of them are then driving along this highway. The top layer is cut and a new layer of asphalt will be laid. We'll have lighting and barriers replaced completely. You saw the pillars, they are rusty. All this will be changed. I think that this issue will be closed for at least 10 years. There will be a guarantee.
Ukraine will receive $2.730 billion from the International Monetary Fund, regardless of whether Ukraine agrees on a new tranche. The Cabinet of Ministers expects that negotiations with the IMF will end in July and the money will come in September. According to Timofey Milovanov, advisor to the head of the President's office, Kyiv has already done everything possible to receive a new tranche.
We have a program for which we should receive a tranche and for which we pass certain laws. Indeed, we would like to close all questions by the end of summer, and our Ukrainian position is that we have fulfilled all our tasks. And what is the position of the IMF? 2.7 billion is a completely different story. This is done within the frameworks of increasing financing by the IMF itself to all participating states. That is, the share is increasing, and the participants get a certain share of the special drawing rights.
737 new cases of COVID-19 were recorded in Ukraine as of July 16. The largest number is in the capital, as well as in Kyiv, Odessa, Donetsk and Poltava regions. At the same time, 2 more cases of the Delta strain were revealed. According to the Center for Public Health, the patients are in Western Ukrainian Uzhhorod. And since the beginning of the vaccination campaign in Ukraine, 3,900,000 people have already got the jab. Preserve the historical memory. Recently, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky discussed the events on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the start of mass shooting in Babi Yar with President of Israel. They've also talked about the development of the Babi Yar National Historical and Memorial Reserve. So how the memorial is going to look like, and do Ukrainians remember the tragedy of the Holocaust? Our correspondent found out. In September, Ukraine will mark the 80th anniversary of the mass shooting at Babi Yar. Then the Nazis condemned more than 100,000 people to death.
Preserve and pass the truth about the tragic events of those times to the next generations is one of the priorities of the Ukrainian government. For this, a memorial complex is being built in Kyiv. Other nations have also joined the process to honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust.
Babi Yar – це страшний.
Babi Yar is a terrible symbol of the Holocaust on our Ukrainian land. We cannot get rid of it, but we can win by honoring the memory of all victims, all those who'd been killed there. The issue of historical justice is very acute. We are responsible to all past and all future generations for historical justice. According to a sociological study by the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, about 44% of Ukrainians do not know where the Babi Yar is. However, there are many who have something to tell about the tragedy of the Holocaust.
We used
to accept Babi Yar in the context of victims of the Holocaust, and we shouldn't forget that a lot of people of other nationalities were lost there. There were so many bodies. People said that the land was moving. This is a terrible tragedy of the Jewish people.
There were hundreds of thousands of people in these ravines. They did not die during the war, in battle. They were simply civilians who were shot. And this is a great sorrow. We come with children. We tell about this place so that they remember, and this will not happen again.
Ukrainian government intends to turn Babi Yar into a world-class memorial and make it a place of memory, not a place of death. Thus, new art objects are being built on its territory. One of them is a symbolic synagogue, a place for meditation and prayer.
Officials plan to build the largest museum complex in Europe in Babi Yar. Its area will be more than 40,000 square meters. They've told our channel how it will look like. This will be in the form of a huge memorial site with 4 or 5 museum spaces. There will be a scientific center, an educational center and a space for children, and dozens of different objects for different ages, for different people. Next year, Ukraine will also mark the 90th anniversary of the 1932-33 famine. The construction of the second stage of the Holodomor Victims Memorial Museum is underway. It is planned to be completed by 2022. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Vlada Tsurkan, UATV News.
That's all for this hour. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook pages. Thank you for staying with the UATV channel. Bye.